Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. Thank you for joining us today. I know you guys are out celebrating Thanksgiving. Maybe some of you are listening to this while you're kind of finishing up your Black Friday shopping, if that is your thing. But joining me today is my co-host, Micah Current. Micah, are you going to be going Black Friday shopping this week?
No. Well, maybe. Um, the the funny thing is we went to the grocery store, I think last Friday, Thursday or Friday, and my wife and I were going through the line
Mhm.
and um we asked the cashier if they were ready for Black Friday. And the cashier was like, "Yeah, but it's not going to be really that bad this year." And my wife was like, "Why?" And the cashier was like, Walmart's doing this thing this year where they're doing sales every single week leading up to Black Friday and then leading up to Christmas. So they're like letting stuff out a little bit at a time. They'll have stuff on, Black Friday itself, but they'll like the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving and the weeks leading up to Christmas. They're spreading it out now, which I think is a cool concept rather than I had friends who would stand in line to get the newest iPad and they would stand there for like 3 hours in line at Walmart or get the biggest TV for the TV deals or
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah.
I did notice that they have a lot of TVs on sale right now. And then like when you go to Walmart or Target where they have like the Blu-rays and the DVDs and stuff on sale, they're like demo versions or they're like promo versions, and they
Mhm.
mark them down to like $5, $6, $7. They already had those out at Walmart, so I grabbed a couple the other day just because I don't have them in my collection. But yeah, I don't know if we're gonna go or not. We usually do. We just like more so, we just grab a cup of coffee and we watch how crazy people act. But I think in the last couple of years, it's not been as bad. So, what about
Yeah,
you?
and I want to know if with COVID that kind of changed everything because they were able to say, hey, you couldn't do Black Friday in 2020. You weren't doing that, so a lot of it was just, and especially I think with the rise of online.
Yeah, I was gonna say Amazon, man. We can get stuff the next day, then why bother?
Yeah, if you can, or yeah, if you can, or even like a lot of times you can put something in your cart, and sometimes they'll hold the price in there until you're ready to buy it, or sometimes they have some type of, or even some other companies like, oh, add it to your wish list on Black Friday, and you can pay the same price like later on if you want it. So it's kind of like so
Well,
it's more of like we're going to reward you for using our interface, so then that way you can still get a Black Friday discount on something that you didn't buy on Black Friday. So
not to
I think having
mention,
it, what's that?
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, no.
I was gonna say not to mention you can on Amazon now. You can, and I know this last couple of years, but you can buy a present. So if I wanted to buy you and Laura a present, I could get you the I don't know the special anniversary of Harry Potter on Blu-ray, and I could get it sent to your house in a wrap. Like they can wrap it for you and they'll box it for you, and they'll say to Scott and Laura from Micah and Alicia, and like they'll do all the hard work for you. You literally just have to add to cart and purchase. Like,
Yeah,
why would I want
exactly.
to leave my house?
Yeah. Like why, and again, why would you, especially if you hate rapping and you're not good at rapping, then that's the way to go. Yeah, so I know we've talked about weird news segments or weird things that happened this day, but we've called them unusual circumstances. So, Micah, any unusual circumstances this week?
Well, I have two, and I think I
Oh
told you.
boy,
So if you don't
this
have
is
one,
a
I have
special
two,
anniversary edition of the Scott Stevens podcast. Micah has two
and I
unusual circumstances to talk about this week.
and I remember them. So, like when we text about it, you're like, I have like 10 and I'm like, I don't have any. Or you have 10 and I can't remember a single one. So yeah, it's good. So the two stories, one, more kind of I would say unusual circumstance, but the community that I live in I'm a part of a group of pastors in the community called the EMA or Edgewood Ministerial Association, and they just do they meet once a month and then they do outreach for the community with like backpack programs or Christmas carols, or they do a community Christmas service or Thanksgiving service and so on and so forth. And they'll do food pantries, and the different pastors from different churches get together once a month and they just talk about the community and how they can make it better, which I think is really good. And they do a great job. But every year they have a community Thanksgiving service. And so last year I led worship for that community Thanksgiving service. And then I got asked to do it again this year. And so yesterday was the community Thanksgiving service for the community of Trenton where we live, and um, the service started at 6 o'clock, and I walked in and I brought my guitar, I brought a microphone and a stand and all that stuff, and so Alicia came with me and helped me set all that up, and um, I was going to play with some tracks, and the I plugged my stuff in, did a sound check and a mic check and all that stuff, and everything sounded great, everything was good, and they meet at the high school. Like I feel like that was like a kind of a middle ground for folks to come together, and it's not one church or the other. But I kind of asked Alicia after we were done, I'm like, why don't we just do that at a church and rotate the church every year and have a church hosted? That was just an idea that I had. But anyway, I did a sound check, did a rehearsal, whenever the slides with the tech, and everything was good. And Pastor Ron, who's a pastor here in the community, got up to welcome everybody. He's the president of the EMA Association, and he got up to welcome everybody, and the mic on the podium didn't work. It just nothing like he could, so it stopped working. And one of the guys that was running stuff and helped set up things gave him a wireless mic that actually worked, which is fine, no issues. But he looked at me when he walked off the stage. He's like, I don't know if your guitar is going to work. I don't know if your microphone's going to work. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that information here and now? So I get up. Sure enough, my microphone doesn't work. My guitar doesn't work. And so basically, I led worship with a wireless microphone and an acoustic guitar that didn't have any audio coming out of it. So that's weird story number one. It's just one of those things where, like, in the moment, you can't fix it and can't troubleshoot it. And especially in a venue that you're not used to. And they have this portable soundboard that looks like it's 20 years old. It's so God only knows how it's wired and configured. And so anyway, that was weird story number one. Weird story number two, I shared last week in our mental health episode that we were kind of in a season of transition and that we were going to go visit churches and things like that. And so I texted a pastor friend of mine Saturday night and said, hey, are you preaching tomorrow at his church? And I said, what time are your services? And he said, yeah, for sure. Love to have you, 9:45 and 11, or 9 and 10:45, something like that. I don't remember the service times to be exact. But a little bit of backstory, and I'm not going to name the church for obvious reasons. But years ago, this church used to be Church of God Anderson, which is what you and I are affiliated with, Scott, like with our ordination. Mm-hmm. And the pastor was ordained in the Church of God, and about 10 or 11 years ago, he felt led to split from the Church of God Anderson and go in a more non-denominational approach, which we can have a whole separate podcast about Church of God and movement versus non-denominational versus whatever. But anyway, years ago, I did an internship at this school for my seminary schooling. And so have some ties there, have some connections there, but I haven't been there in over a decade. And so back then, when it was a Church of God Anderson church, they were lucky to run 150 on the weekend. They were lucky to run that. So we get up to where the church is yesterday, and we pull into the parking lot. There's not a single spot in the parking lot. And we get to the one side of the parking lot, which they've done a building addition onto this building, but we go around the parking lot because they've extended it. There's no parking. The only parking spot in the entire parking lot, Scott, is the guest parking spot. And Alicia looks at me and she's like, we're guests today, so park there. And so, of course, we park there and we walk in, and it was like one of the most, I don't know what the word I would use is, but like, it was very inspiring, right? Because this church has went from being Church of God to a non-denominational with a Southern Baptist kind of ideology and theology background. And they are running 600 to 700 on the weekend now. And so we went into this church yesterday, and they were like scooting us in because there weren't enough seats for the second service. And that they said it's like that for first service and second service. They run their venue holds about 350 And so they'll have 350 first service, 350, 375 second service. And it's not including all the kids that are not, in the room because they're in children's ministry. Um, I spoke with the pastor after, we got to catch up a little bit, and he was like, "Hey, I'd love to get coffee with you in a couple of weeks." But he said, God has just been so faithful to us, and God has just blessed us. And I told him it took a lot of courage to just do what he felt led to do in reference to breaking off of the Church of God and surrendering his credentials and going a completely different direction to which he felt God was leading him. He also told me, in addition to their church running 700 people on the weekend, that they planted a church last year. And they're really into church health and church revitalization. And so what they've done is they've taken 100 of their people and sent them to this other church and basically planted and replanted a church in the community where they live to help a church and regrow that church. And it's not a satellite campus of this church. It's just another church that they've helped. Like, how mega churches do it. Like Elevation, for example, is like there's Elevation Charlotte and there's Elevation Orlando.
In
This church is like, yeah. So this church is, the name of this church plus the church that they've went to help revitalize and plant. They just keep the name of that church, but they take their people, they adopt their ideology, their theology, and they partner with this church. He said that they're also in the process of planning another one. He's like, that's their hope and their goal and their prayer is to just plant churches and help them heal, help them restore the, what it used to be, and just move forward with ministry and partner alongside them instead of being a quote unquote mega church, which I thought was an amazing philosophy. Instead of just, having Scott Stedman North Campus, Scott Stedman, South Campus, and so on and so forth. But like, he said that, God has been so faithful and blessed us, but like, it was just incredible to sit in that service. And it was like, I don't remember the last time I went to church where I was told to scoot over because there wasn't enough seats. Right. And
exactly.
So and, they'll be the first to tell you that, I don't know what we're doing that attracts this many people, but it's working. Whatever we're doing obviously is working. And I will say that it was more of it felt very Southern Baptist in the sense of it was not traditional worship, but there was a lot of liturgy. There was a lot of they had a guy come up and do announcements and pray, and then they did 2 songs, and then they shared they did like corporate prayer, and then they had somebody else come up and do a scripture reading for the sermon text. They did 1 more song of worship, prayed, pastor came up and preached like a 45-minute message. And then they did a response song. They did a benediction and they sent you on your way. And it was just like, there wasn't nothing like special to it either. There wasn't like all these glamorous lights. There wasn't like a haze machine. There wasn't, but the place was packed. And, in addition to running 700 between 2 services, planning a church of 100, getting ready to plan a church of another church of 100, like you're looking at like anywhere from 700 to 1,000 people on any given weekend, which is just astonishing to me because 10 years ago that church couldn't break 150. So
yeah.
I don't know if that's a weird story, but that was just
it's interesting. And I think that's interesting because you have to look at
infrastructure.
Some infrastructure, but then also at the same time, you're always pushed. That's the thing. You go to any of these conferences or you go to these leadership conferences, and it's always about trying to do the next big attractive thing. You got to do this or try to do this or try to do that, which, in some cases it's like, I've been to those conferences. Sometimes like, okay, that's good information to help. And then there's other times where it's like, yeah, but I don't have the tools or the equipment or the resources to be able to do that in my small church. That's not going to work. And I think the other thing with non-denominationalism is sometimes it's like, doing it right. Because there's sometimes where people do, like even, we've mentioned Steve Roby on the show before, but even though technically Water's Edge is a Church of God church, they always list themselves as non-denominational, and they don't have anything that says they're a Church of God in any of their literature, because especially in the South, you say you're Church of God, they think you're the crazy
Cleveland, Tennessee
in tongues people, the Cleveland, and not necessarily. So and I mean, I've had those issues. Yeah, I've had those issues in Ohio where I was looking for a worship leader, and I put an ad out, and someone came back and he even said like, "Oh yeah, you're." He's like, "Oh, just one real quick. You're the Church of God that does the whole speaking in tongues thing, right?" And I said, "No, we're the other one." And then never heard from that person again. Like, so it's one of those things where even like within denominations, sometimes there's could be a sticking point to it. And I think even
Well,
just
I was going to say too, to add to that, Scott, like the difference in Jordan Halstead, our friend Jordan has had this conversation with me numerous times, but like there's this preconceived notion that the Church of God is non-denominational, and there's a little bit of confusion where they call us a movement, right? And there's this movement versus non-denominational, and people really don't know. So when you have that conversation with a potential worship leader, they don't know how to respond to that because they don't know the identity of what the Church of God is and what they actually stand for.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think the other thing you said in your thing that's interesting too is that instead of like planning churches, they're going to do other churches to kind of do revitalization, which years ago when I was still in Ohio, I was very strong in pushing revitalization, especially when I'm seeing churches, smaller churches that have some good bones, have good locations, has a good location, has the potential for growth, and even, not that this is a sticking point or anything, but actually are faithfully contributing to Ohio ministries. And yet it seems like the whole church planning idea is, well, if you have this smaller church, we want to make sure that their deeds conditioned to us so that when they do decide to close their doors, we get the money in the sale of the property. So then we can use that money to go plant another church. That may or may not happen. Whereas some of these churches that really, if they had like resources to do this one thing, then they could really blow up. But it's almost like, well, we want you to die so we can build something else, instead of, hey, why don't we try to send some people, send some resources, send some wisdom to this place and watch it kind of revitalized. And that's kind of, I mean, I've always been against church planning for years, so it's no surprise that I'm still kind of like that as well.
And this isn't like a criticism of the Church of God, but it's like, do you think that they're not open to that kind of an idea?
You know what? I think I mean, I think now some of them are, because especially they're seeing some works, like especially at GA. They had Dan Turner speak, and he's someone who, like, literally, we have this church, we're going to shut it down, we're going to say we're done. It's going to release everybody, that they had no commitment or contract to the church. And then they were doing preview days, and they're still in the same space. They're just now going to kind of do a revitalization within their own space and try to like really revitalize some stuff. And it worked, and they were growing and booming and being very effective, and especially reaching out to a lot of diverse neighborhoods. So they had a lot more diversity and representation within their own congregation on a Sunday morning. So I think in some ways the Church of God probably bought into the whole church plant thing, because that's what's going to help grow churches. And what they're finding out is,
There's
that's
no
not always the
guarantee that'll
case.
work.
Yeah, there is no guarantee that'll work. Yeah, I mean, you hope you have the right person because they took this test and they scored high on this test, and you're
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, this is going to be a good church planner. But I mean, I know some church planners who were very excited about church planning, did it for probably about maybe 5, maybe at max 10 years, and now they're not doing it anymore.
Well, it's hard because you got to rent a space if you don't have a building. You've got to set up, you got to tear down, you got to know all the audio, video, and lighting. You have to
Yeah.
make a space look like a church. You have to recruit volunteers that are going to be dedicated to serving every single week. Set up and tear down just becomes super draining on volunteers. Unless you have, like, I don't care if you have the best volunteers on the planet, but
Mm-hmm.
like, setting up 100 chairs, and then you got to go out and recruit. You got to go out and market. You got to go out and do all these things. And it's more than just sticking an A-frame out on the road saying, hey, we have church, right? Like
Yeah.
there is just, and that's like, there's another preconceived notion that's now people are just going to show up, right? Like they're, you know, uh, Jordan was telling me a number of months ago that, that Ohio Ministries was really trying to push that they wanted to plant churches and they wanted to plant churches. And it's like, but you have all these churches in Ohio and Ohio used to be, I think, the second largest or the largest uh, state for Church of God churches in the nation in reference to number of congregations. And at one point, I think we had over 100 congregations in Ohio. And the idea of, hey, let's go plant 50 churches in the next 5 years instead of saving or go revitalizing, or offering restoration towards the churches that are struggling right now. What are you going to do? Just let those churches die out? To me, Scott, it seems kind of passive. It seems kind of passive to deal with the churches that are having those issues. Does that make sense?
It does. I think in some ways it does because if you're going to do revitalization, it's not just sending money and resources to help them. It's like you have to
go in and you have to work it out.
You have to work it out. There may be some reconciliation things that have to happen. There could be some wounded history in that church that really needs to be healed, and that takes a lot of work. So it's almost like, well, what's going to be, and it's going to take time too. So the fact that, and I'm thinking, I'm just going to use Ohio as an example because we have our main hub, but then we have 5 districts.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm the general director of Ohio Ministries and I want to do this more revitalization thing, not only do I have to train people within each of the districts to be able to do this type of work and do it effectively, but then I have to make sure that when they're going into these spaces, are these churches really open to wanting to change, wanting to be transformed, willing to work out and really kind of shed a light on some of the woundedness in their church and kind of talk about it and repent from it or even be reconciled from it, depending on what the situation is, and do it. And that probably takes, and again, that's going to take a lot of work on the higher ups, as opposed to here's this pastor who's passionate about church planning. Okay, we're going to throw some money your way. Go plant a church in Trenton.
That's the last thing that needs to happen right now.
Yeah, go plant a church in Trenton, and we're gonna do like a pay scale thing. So we're gonna, we're gonna help you with this percentage of money. You have to raise this percent of money, and then over time, over a period of 5 years, you should be self-sustaining.
Well, my wife and I go into the coffee shop in our town, and we love it. And a couple of months ago, we walked, like, you go in your order, you go down the thing, you get your drink. We went down the thing. There was a card that says "New church coming soon," and we walked out, and we're like, "Where's that church going to be?" And it's going to be like right on the outskirts of town. We counted the number of churches, Scott, in where we live, and there's like 13 churches. We're not a large community. We're like the stereotypical Hallmark movie small town, right? Like where everybody knows everybody. Everybody goes to high school here. Everybody goes to college at Miami, and they come back to Trenton, and it's like, everybody knows everybody, right? And so, like, the last thing we need is a 13th church because there's not enough churches to go to. But like, it blows my mind. It blows my mind, really, the strategy behind, the idea of church planning versus, fixing some of the churches that are like what I said just a few minutes ago. It may or may not work, right? I could go in and, or I could go plant a church and it may or may not work. But like, also on the other side of that, if I go in to help a church that doesn't want to get help, like, they could just close their doors too. So there's no guarantee either way that idea is going to work. And it's stressful to me to think. And you shared that you don't like the idea of church planning, but like, why not go help the churches that are struggling, right? That are even associated with a movement or a denomination or, and I've shared it in other episodes on this show that, like, you drive down the street in this community where I live, and in 10 years, if people don't change course, there's not going to be a church because they're all going to die, and there's not going to be anything left to support that ministry, which is sad. It really is. But like, the Presbyterian church, the Presbyterian church at large is what I mean, isn't coming down, into our community and saying, hey, this is what you can do better. The Methodist church is, the same thing with Methodist or Presbyterian or the Baptist or whatever, right? And so it's really frustrating because, like, I'm sitting here like, I'm only one person, you're only one person, and it's like you can only do so much and you can only offer so much input. But it's like, Um, yeah, I really struggle with that idea. But to me, back to the conversation of just going to this church yesterday and seeing how much it's grown and flourished because they truly believed and prayed and sought what they thought God was doing for that ministry. It's amazing to see how much it's grown. Um, to a church, and that I guess that poses a separate question. Some people that are older than us in pastoral roles would shun that or disagree with that or basically, you know, throw them to the outside, or they're an outsider now because they're not, well, they've decided that they weren't going to be Church of God anymore, but yet God's continued to bless them, right? So where's that disconnect, Scott? Like they truly believe that that was what God was telling them to do, and obviously it's working because they're running 700 people every
Well, it's
weekend.
probably because D.S. Warner was right. Denominationalism is evil. And when the Church of God became a denomination.
It wouldn't be a Scott Stedman podcast if you didn't bring in D.S. Warner.
Exactly. Got to bring that guy in.
Hey,
Daniel Sidney.
I have several of his books. I haven't read it in a long time, but have you ever read The Cleansing of the Sanctuary?
I have not read that one.
It's a good one. It's a D.S. Warner book.
All right, I gotta check that one out. I could probably find it's probably like I found a lot of his books for free now on like these like public domain sites because they're so old.
So now that we've ranted for 40 minutes about my experience at church yesterday, post serving, do you have a weird story or experience from yesterday?
Yes, I do.
Or this week?
It was this past weekend. So this weekend I went back to Virginia to move my wife. She's done with her student teaching. She just has to like write a paper and then she's done with her semester and then she'll get her license and all that good stuff. So
which I have to present my project for my class and then I'm done. I don't know where you are with your coursework, but I don't think you've shared for a while. But I still have
to write my 20-page paper, and I think I haven't had time to do it because of everything else. So I'm going to be cracking on it this week. But no, so that's fine. So we kind of packed up some stuff Friday, and then usually we try to pack up everything the night before, and then we leave early morning the next day. Well, we got back from dinner, and Laura's just like, I'm really tired. I just don't want to pack anymore. I'm like, okay, because she had a long day at school. She was actually working at school. That was her final day. So it's like, okay. So, she kind of went and laid down. I was just doing some cleaning and stuff and not trying to be too loud in the apartment. Then we had to go, we need a screwdriver. So I had to go to Lowe's. So Saturday morning, I go to Lowe's at like 6 o'clock in the morning, get to Lowe's, buy a screwdriver, come back. As I'm coming back, I see Augusta County Sheriff's Officer coming down, and he's now diverting traffic off of 81, Interstate 81. I'm like, there must be a bad accident on 81 South somewhere, because if they have to divert traffic off of the interstate, something bad's happened. Go back, start packing. It's about 10 o'clock by the time we finally turn the keys in, everything else, and we're leaving. Get on 64. We're about to approach 81. And we're seeing signs like, accident up ahead. I'm like, that would happen at 6 o'clock. That's probably past now. Next thing you know, we're now being diverted to go up on 81 North. I'm like, okay. And then we get off. So finally I told Laura, it's like, hey, let's get to 11. And let's just take 11 down to 64. Still have no clue because I'm not like intentionally like looking to figure out what the heck happened on this highway. It wasn't until we got towards the Ohio River when we're about to cross to Ohio, like 4, at this point, it's like 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I just happened to pull up Facebook, and sure enough, I see someone posted something on what happened. So what happened is semi tractor trailers driving on 64, about to merge onto 81 South. Something must have happened because he goes off the guardrail, lands down onto 81 Northbound. There's a pickup truck that was going, and this tractor trailer lands on top of this pickup truck. So the driver died instantly. The two in the tractor trailer in critical condition. The tractor trailer was carrying chicken waste, and it spread all over the highway. And there's 2 more accidents for people slipping in the chicken waste on the highway. So that's why it took so long. But and it was weird because Laura's like, that could have been us if we would have got up early and drove. We could have been very likely we could have been in that. So, we kind of thought like, man, every day's kind of a gift.
Also, the smell.
Oh yeah, and that's where I was going to get to, because when I would tell that story, I would either have two reactions: either A, like, oh my gosh, that's so tragic, and oh, that's so awful, and then, or it's kind of like laughter because of the chicken waste part. Like one guy at church, when I told the guy at church this, he said it's kind of like the Back to the Future when Biff and his gang would always slide into the cow manure.
Yes.
It's like that's a chicken waste. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. Like, so there's always like tragedy and comedy all mixed in with that story. So that was kind of my unusual circumstance this weekend. But granted, we made it back safely. We got everything unpacked and unloaded, and yeah. And now just kind of getting stuff ready for the Advent season, which is where we're taking our podcast today. So,
which is all the more reason for you to get out of Virginia.
why? Because they don't celebrate Advent in Virginia.
No. I was saying because of all the crazy traffic and the accidents and stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I even told Laura's like, I don't know what's worse, because I had to get my kids to my son to basketball after I took my daughter to swim lessons last Tuesday, and I was in a crawl on 670 to just get over to the other side of Columbus, and it took me 30 minutes, which should have took 10 minutes. And I'm like, I don't know what's worse, just being stopped in traffic and not moving on 81 when there's an accident, or just doing a slow crawl. And actually experiencing both, I realized, yeah, I'd rather do the slow crawl and going 20 miles per hour on 670 than being parked on 81 just sitting there because you can't move. Yeah, so Micah, you talked about wanting to discuss about Advent and all that stuff, so I will let you take it away.
Well, what are your thoughts on the Advent season in churches? Like, are you like, what do you remember growing up like doing in a church as far as Advent was concerned?
So I don't remember, again, when I started going to church, it was like in the Nazarene tradition before my family left the church and then went to the Church of God. I don't really remember too much about Advent season in the Nazarene church, but I do remember a lot in the Church of God. And only thing I vaguely remember as a kid was basically you had some families read a passage, they light a candle, and that was pretty much it. And then and then you had a Christmas Eve service and you do some type of candle lighting thing, and that was it. So that was pretty much what Advent was. As I started pastoring and started going into the Advent season, in some ways, especially as a new pastor, it was always great that that the Church of God, especially the women of the Church of God, would always have this Advent material stuff that you could look at and you can, kind of help you navigate through the Advent season, kind of give you a theme. And so that's been very helpful, especially for someone who's just kind of starting out. And then even like the devotionals that they would put out too. So Advent kind of became more important to me as far as how I would lead Advent. And because I think in a way it kind of prepares, it's good to kind of prepare the congregation for the coming of Christ, which is kind of what Advent means. It means coming. But then, as I look deeper into Advent, it's fascinating that when you look at the history of Advent, that Advent originally was supposed to be a mere reflection of Lent. Like it was just supposed to be a season of fasting before Christmas. So the fact that now it's not, it's more of like a more intentional movement to get people starting from the first day of Advent to the Christmas Eve service to kind of anticipate the coming of Jesus Christ and into our world, and kind of that spiritualness which I like to do and like to be a part of.
I guess the reason I ask is because like I've seen it done a number of ways, right? Like when I was a kid, I remember my dad doing the hanging of the greens service where like they would put a Christmas tree in the sanctuary and there wasn't like anything on it, and so they would have readings and people hang stuff, and ornaments meant certain things. And of course, the Advent calendar, like not calendar, Advent candles were in the sanctuary, and each week a family would share in the reading. They would light a candle. Each candle represented something: hope, peace, love, and joy. You had the three purple candles, one pink candle, um, and then you had the Christ candle, which I think was there one in the middle, which is like the Christ candle, which was like white
Yeah, the
or
Christ
something like
candle's
that.
white, and then there's the candle of hope, the candle of peace, the
Peace,
candle of
love, and
love
joy.
and
But
joy.
like there were three purples, one pink, and one white, which was the Jesus candle.
Yeah. The Jesus candle,
And
yeah.
yes, the Jesus candle, light of the world. He's the light of the world. I think that's what it kind of represented, or the coming light of the world. And a lot of churches took that super seriously. But as I've gotten older, Scott, I think some churches are really into it, and then some churches don't do it. Or they do it differently. They don't do readings. They don't do. I know one year, a church I used to work at, we did videos, and we had staff share, you know, the meaning of hope, like do a 90-minute promo video, the meaning of hope, the meaning of peace, the meaning of love, the meaning of joy. Leading up to Christmas, we didn't do the candles, um, but we decorated the church. So,
Mhm.
do you have an opinion on, like, I think that was in an effort to make it more modern versus like, because sometimes, Scott, it looks super cheesy, and then some people, like we've talked about it in other episodes, but some people aren't super comfortable with public speaking. um so if you get a family up there to do reading, that and they're holding the microphone down here instead of like up to their chin,
Yeah.
and they're not used to reading, or they're a young family in the church, and they got two kids that are screaming and crying the whole time when you're trying to do the reading, and it becomes super cringy and awkward. So the video idea is to kind of you know I guess, A, modernize it, and B, you can do a lot in post production, whereas you can't do that live in a live setting. So
Yeah.
what's your thought on that?
Uh I mean, I think it depends on the nature, and I think it depends on the culture too of a particular congregation. In some ways, I like having the people up there to read, and sometimes I do like the kids kind of like sticking their tongue out and making the faces, because even though it's kind of taken distracting from what's being read, at least it kind of shows a more of a genuineness of, you know, we're not coming to Christ, we're not anticipating Christ coming to us as these perfect human beings. We
Mm-hmm.
have our flaws, we have our intricacies, we have our times where, sometimes we have these intricacies where church is kind of boring and we don't want to be in there, or for whatever the case may be. At the same time, I also think just having the videos do kind of work good, because a lot of times, and I mean, I was in charge of kind of getting all the Advent readers for church for both our services, and a lot of times it's just like trying to find a date that people are not doing something.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not going out to traveling for Thanksgiving, if they're not, you know, if kids get out of school early, depending on the school system, they may be gone. So just trying to find people to read, which is hard. But if you can say, hey, would you like to be a reader, and we'll just record you and we're just going to play it as a video, then you don't have to worry about the time commitment or making sure someone's there. Or if someone doesn't show up on Sunday, it's like, okay, who's my backup? I think in that way the video component is nice, because you then don't have to worry about any type of surprises that's going to happen, except for the media guy in the back accidentally not playing the video, or the editor renders everything and doesn't check the video and there's no sound.
Yeah. um I One year, so I guess the reason I ask is because some churches do it really, really well, and some churches kind of throw it together. And then I know Church of God Ministries, again, that you and I are affiliated with. I think they offer, and in the last 10 years or so, they've offered a book that goes along with
Yeah.
Advent, which has devotionals, which has, you know, readings and stuff leading up to Christmas, and you can use that as kind of a curriculum, if you will,
And now
for
they started, I know the last couple of times they've actually had video,
okay.
where you could do video. And I think they even had some stuff like, if you can't find people to read, they just have like one of the higher ups for the Christian
Church of God
Women
office.
Connection just kind of read it and do that, or
Yeah.
play, or sometimes they even give you a countdown video. They even tell you stuff for like worship ideas, especially for smaller churches that may not have a worship leader. It's like, here's the link to the YouTube video that has like the song and the words that kind of go across there. You could just play that in service, and then you know, and you can sing along, and even broke it down between traditional services versus like more modern service. So they did it, I think, over the last 5 years, they've really kind of made the Advent stuff that they have produced really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you don't like the theme, then that's one thing. But
Well, and I was
if
gonna,
you,
I think, no, I was gonna kind of get to that too. Like, do you, if you don't, well, first let me say, as the worship leader, over the years, it's kind of been my responsibility to gather people, like you said, Scott, to do the readings. Um,
mhm.
and it just becomes a chore every year to like, hey, can this family do it this week? And this family, and like, it's a huge puzzle to put together. And then what happens if they get sick and they don't show up Sunday morning? Then you're scrambling to find somebody to do it. And then, I one year I did it where I pre-recorded everything and I made it videos and I just produced it myself. And we had different families in the church just read it, and I produced, edited it, and we put a set together, and it looked really cool. And we even had the children's ministry do it one year where it was like, we had our children's pastor or children's director or whatever, like, have a group of kids, the, God of joy, it is your love. Like, read a passage that goes along with the theme of the week, like for joy or love or peace or hope. And then I produced it, and it went over really well. The kids had fun, and then the people in the service really enjoyed it because, hey, we're getting to see our kids on the screen, and it's really cool to see that happen. And so, back to the other, what you were saying, Scott, like, do you, if you're not a huge fan of the curriculum that Church of God puts out, or the United Methodist Church, whoever's doing it, do you just write your own curriculum? And that's okay too.
Yeah.
Or I'm sure you could like go to like Life Church's website, because Life Church is a big church in Oklahoma, but they put all their content online for free as resources for other churches. So like, I'm sure they would have something, but like, um, yeah, there's a number of ways to approach it. What about, speaking of worship, you were talking about that. How do you feel about Christmas music during the Advent season leading up to Christmas? Like, the approach that I've taken over the years is like, I'll do one Christmas song the first week right after Thanksgiving. The second week I'll add another, the third week. And so by the time we get to Christmas, we're doing a full worship set. So we're not doing all Christmas music. We're still doing contemporary worship or blended worship with the addition of
Mhm.
Christmas music moving forward. And so by the time we get to Christmas Eve and our Christmas Eve services or Christmas Sunday, we have a culmination of songs that we can all do together. And it's more closer to Christmas than, hey, we just got done with Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and I'm in that same mindset. Like when I would have to lead worship, I'd make sure, hey, we're going to do one Christmas song, and I think I would increase, like, or maybe I might do two Christmas songs, but we never would do a full Christmas set until the Christmas Eve service.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if like this year, Christmas Eve is on a Saturday, Christmas Day is on a Sunday. So if you're a church that is having a Christmas Eve service and a Christmas Day service, I would have Christmas songs those 2 days. Um, but yeah, I don't, and I mean, I think sometimes that can kind of be a sticking point, because I think there might be the expectation that, oh, we're in Advent season, we're just going to be singing Christmas music all the time. And for me, it's like, well, you want to build to something. For me, I'm all about building. So the fact that I can sing a couple Christmas songs on the first Sunday of Advent, November 27th, to now I'm going to a full blown Christmas set on December 24th. That for me, I think that's kind of something special.
Yeah, I think, at the risk of it being cheesy, like, I
Mm.
think it's such a special time of year. I think that it's hard to find volunteers to want to do that. And again, I don't think that there's no right or wrong way to do the Advent season, but like, I've noticed in the last couple of years that churches aren't doing it as much. Like they're just kind of, well, here's another thing, Scott. What do you feel about writing a sermon series around the topics of Advent? Like we did one a couple of years ago at a church I worked at, and it was called like, um, gosh, what was it called? More Than a Tree. And
Mm,
so, we did a 4-week series on Advent, but it was called More Than a Tree, and it was called, and the pastor kind of related. We got closer to Christmas, and I think like the last week it was like the more than a tree, the wood from a tree became a cross that Jesus was
hmm
going to die for, and it wasn't just that Jesus was born. Jesus was born for a reason, right? And
yeah,
Jesus is the reason for the season, and Jesus died for you, and so on and so forth, leading up to the crucifixion. And it was a different approach, right? Because we don't often talk about the crucifixion and stuff during Advent because we're celebrating his birth, not
yeah.
his
Uh,
death.
yeah. I kind of have a sticking point with that in some ways because I think it's good that we have to tie in Jesus to, the reason why he came to this earth. At the same time, I've seen some pastors who have taken that same concept, but then they go to Jesus was born to die. And I have an issue with that because it's like, well, Jesus was born to just die for our sins. Then what's the whole point of the Gospels? I mean, why don't we just get to the point where Jesus was born, he died on the cross? I mean, there's a reason why we have the Sermon on the Mount. There's a reason why we have the miracle stories. There's a reason why Jesus handpicked the disciples and how Jesus was teaching them. There's a reason why we get to see kind of the life of Jesus and ministry from him being born to him growing up to even him being crucified and even being resurrected and ascends into heaven. There's all that stuff's important. So for me, when it comes to Christmas, I mean, I think we don't have to stick to the let's talk about Mary, let's talk about Joseph, let's talk about the wise man. I think we can, do things like, oh, more than just a tree and do that sort of things. But I think we have to be careful that we just don't get to the proclaim the message that the only reason why Jesus came to this world was just to die for our sins and not really talk about the hope that he brings and how he brought hope not through his death but even through his life, how he brought a lot of hope and love and mercy and grace and forgiveness and reconciliation in his 3 years of ministry that we see recorded in the Gospels.
Hmm. Yeah. Another series that at another church I worked at was called How to Handle the Holidays, and holidays is spelled HOLIDAZE, and it was a picture of Santa Claus like passed out, like just being so over Christmas. And so
Oh,
and basically the theme
with DAZE and so Santa being passed out, my mind was going to a whole different place.
the theme behind that, Scott, was just how stressful holidays can be for
Yeah.
families, and, trying to balance family and work and making sure your kids are happy, and uh, that the holidays can be a lot for people. So yeah, um, I just want to do a quick conversation about Advent because, like, you were asking me if I had any topics, and we hadn't talked about it at this point. And I know it's coming up soon because this week, as we talked earlier, this week is Thanksgiving, and we'll jump right into that season. And so, um, yeah, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on Advent, and
Oh yeah.
just to see, um, what is your church planning on doing, in the next couple of weeks, the one that you're at
Yes.
now.
So yeah, we have. So I think I mean, we're going to have readings. We're going to have the lighting of candles. We actually have three Christmas Eve services. The first one's a family one, and that's where I'm working on doing a kids nativity. So I've already written a script for the kids nativity, making a shooting schedule because it's all going to be filmed and on the back of a green screen. So then I can throw in like some cool backgrounds and stuff,
Are
and
you going to
maybe
wear
do
your
some.
green polo that you're wearing right now?
No, I'm not. I'm actually the scenes that I'm in. I'm not going to be behind a green screen. I'm just going to be like in a study, reading the Christmas story. But then we also going to we actually partnered with our preschool group that meets at the church, and we're going to have them participate with the kids at the church and kind of do a children's choir, and they're going to sing like a couple of Christmas songs. So that's like first service. Second service is like a more of a traditional Christmas Eve service, and then our later one, which I think is at like 7, I think it's at like 9 o'clock, is more of a candlelight visual Christmas Eve service. And then we're having Christmas Day service, a combined Christmas Day service at 10 o'clock on Sunday. And that's kind of how they do things here. So yeah, so I get to participate in 4 services this year. So
my friends at Crossing Church in Oklahoma, they've in the past have done over 20 services on
oh wow,
Christmas. It's because they have multiple campuses, and
yeah,
so
goodness.
I don't know what they're doing this year, but yeah. Anything else you want to share about Advent, or do you want to just kind of wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up, and especially for those of you who are listening, like let us know, like what are some of your Advent traditions? It'd be good to see if they're similar, if they're different. Even if you're a pastor and you're someone who maybe you're thinking, well, I want to write my own Advent stuff because I don't really like what my institution sends me. And so, and kind of what are some of the success you've had with that, with writing your own Advent stuff, or even having a team do all that. So I think these are some great topics, especially to get into season, especially, Advent season is kind of like the Super Bowl of of the church, both Easter and Advent season. So make sure you pace yourself. Make sure you take plenty of time to have that time in the Lord, and even take those sabbatical days to just kind of have that time of relaxation and stuff, because I know we can easily get swept in, not with the hustle and bustle of the holiday season with getting gifts and traveling and stuff, but also the hustle and bustle of trying to usher our people through the Advent season. So I'm Scott, and thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll bring back, I can't even talk today, and we'll be back with another episode next week. Take care, my friends.